Hi everyone, DisturbedShadow here, getting on with the Threat Signal discography again. Today we're going to be talking about their second album entitled Vigilance, which came out back in 2009. Now, the first thing I want to mention about this album is that it's an entirely new lineup, with the exception of frontman Jon Howard on the vocals. Everyone else left the band at some point between the release of Under Reprisal on this album and were replaced by new members. So there's a whole different feel to this album because there's four brand new musicians coming in, and it's going to be a little different because of that, and because the band decided to go in a slightly different direction. Just overall, there's not as much. I don't want to say there's not as much technical stuff. It's a pretty technical album because they are still a progressive metal band, but it's slightly less technical, I want to say, than their previous album, and it's more singing focus as opposed to screaming focus. While there's still a lot of screaming, there's a lot more singing vocals on it compared to previous albums. To their last album, which was their debut album. So they're sort of taking a slightly different approach here, with going with the more singing-driven route, even though it's still very much got a lot of screaming on it. So it's a little bit different there as well. So it's just, like I keep saying, it's got a very different feel to it compared to the last album, but it still feels like a Threat Signal album, even with the changing of the guard here and just the change of style in general. It still feels like it's Threat Signal. And that's a lot probably because of Jon Howard's vocals are very unique. But overall, it still feels like a Threat Signal album, like I've been saying. Well, let's jump in and talk about some tracks that stood out to me. First track I want to talk about is the opener, Afterlife, which sort of sets this album up and shows you what it's going to be as compared to what their last album was, where the song is mostly singing as opposed to screaming. There's just a few screams here and there, but the main focus of the song is singing. And it sort of has a more melodic, catchy type of chorus, where it sort of pulls you into the song. And it's got these big melodic hooks in it, and it's all in the singing. There's not a lot of melodic guitar playing in the song at all. So it's really putting a focus on Jon Howard's voice, and I think it's a good setup for what this album is. Track number 2, Through My Eyes, which is one of my favorite Threat Signal songs of all time, and it's probably the best song on this album. It's just a very unique song. It's got this really killer intro riff, and then it has this really, really cool melodic chorus part. And then after the first chorus, there's this really cool melodic guitar piece that's just amazing. And it's really interesting. It's really different than anything on this album. It's got these cool effects on it. It's very technical, but still very, very melodic. It just sounds really awesome. And it reoccurs throughout the rest of the track. I just think it's a really cool thing. And then when they layer that on top of the chorus again, it just sounds amazing. And then Jon's voice is fantastic on this song. He does these really heavy screams, and he's got this really melodic singing voice that he shows off here as well. And it all comes together really nicely, and like I said, it's the best song on this album, and for good reason, because it's just a really, really good song. Next song I want to talk about, track number 4, United We Stand, which is another one of my personal favorites on this album. It's got this heavy riff in it, and then it keeps changing to all these different cool heavy riffs as it goes throughout. And then at the end, it's got this really cool melodic part that sort of wraps up the song, and I just think it's cool the way the song progresses. And then Jon does a lot of cool alternations between lower growls and higher pitched screams, and then of course the singing voice. So there's all this cool different stuff happening on the vocals, and it really showcases all his different vocal talents. Track number 5, Beyond Recognition, which is one of the faster, heavier songs of the album. It's got some pretty fast riffing, but the riffs aren't terribly technical, but it's really cool nonetheless. What I really like about this song is the way it ends with this really cool melodic guitar bit that sort of deviates from what the original part of the song was doing. It's really cool, and it's got some cool effects on it. It just sounds really cool, so it's a cool way to end that track. Track number 6, another personal favorite of mine, Another Source of Light, which is really different than anything that you've heard from Threat Signal up to this point. It starts off with an acoustic intro, and it comes in with this harmonized dual lead part. And it's just simplistic drumming, and it's interesting. And then the vocals come in, and it's a very different lyrical content than most of Threat Signal's songs, which tend to focus on political issues. Where this one is about moving on after failed relationship, which is not really something that Threat Signal talks about. They don't do a lot of songs that have personal lyrical content. It's mostly political stuff, which is most of the tracks on this album, with the exception of this song and a couple others. So they're treading into new territory here, and they do a really good job. And Jon's vocals on this song are fantastic. It really shows off his singing voice. He can do more scratchy type of singing, not really scratchy, but sort of growly type singing, and then more melodic type singing. And it really shows off his higher register on the song, where he goes into some higher register singing that you don't really see a lot of from Threat Signal, since he tends to be, at least on his singing voice, in the medium range, but he shows off his higher capabilities here, and I think that's cool. And the song just comes together really nicely. It's a really cool song, and that dual lead part that I mentioned is just really cool, and it really pulls you into the song. So this is another really great song from the album that you should check out. Track number 8, Severed. This is a more simplistic song, but it's just it's a headbanging song. You're going to be headbanging all the way through. It's just this really heavy, fast-paced drumming, and it gets you like pumped up. And then there's just a really cool melodic chorus that pulls you into the song as well. So it's a really cool song, and it's short and it's to the point, but it's just a really good song. Track number 12, Escape from Reality. This is an interesting song. It's got some really technical type of riffs in the verses, and then it's more simplistic in the chorus, and it puts the focus on Jon's voice again. And then towards the end of the song, it mixes things up a bit. It changes, which is something Threat Signal frequently does in the albums, where they do verse, chorus, and then the rest of the song is all different kind of stuff. Like, Jon will do some different type of vocal stuff that wasn't in the previous parts of the song, and then all the riffs and stuff change up to be different things. And then it wraps up with this cool, simple melodic bit that sort of ends the song. It's just a cool way to wrap the song up. And finally, the final track on the album, track number 13, To Remember, which is the heaviest and fastest song on this album. It's just really heavy. And then there's all these cool technical riffs throughout the whole beginning part of the song. And then Jon does a lot of really heavy screaming on this track, and then there's some cool gang vocal parts in the choruses that sort of change things up a bit from the typical Threat Signal formula. And then in true Threat Signal fashions, the second half of the song is all this cool melodic guitar playing. It gets a little bit repetitive towards the end, where they're playing the same melodic bit over and over again, but it just fades out, and it's just really cool sounding, and it's a cool way to end the album despite being slightly repetitive. So it's a good way to wrap up this album. Now let's go on and talk about the band members. We'll start off with Jon Howard on vocals, who I've been referencing throughout this entire album review. He's a really good vocalist, and he really sets the tone for what Threat Signal sounds like. And he's like the one member that you can't change from this band, because it would completely change what the band sounded like. And that's saying something, considering all the band members have left and have been replaced with new people, and it still sounds like Threat Signal because of Jon. So he's sort of the anchor point for them. And he does an amazing job on this album, even though he's doing a little more focus on the singing side of things on this track. He's got a really good range of vocals. He has low screams, high screams, mid-range screams. His high screams are fantastic. Like I mentioned on the last album review, it's just he can go really high with his screams, and there's not nearly as many of them as on Under Reprisal, but there's still a lot of moments where he goes really high. It just sounds really cool. And his singing voice has improved a lot. It's smoother. It's got a really nice melodic sound to it, even though he still kind of sounds like Chester. But like I said in the last album review, he's got that grittier sound to his voice, and it's still present. But he's doing a lot more melodic type of stuff, so he's doing a fantastic job as always. Now let's talk about two new guitarists, Travis Montgomery and Adam Weber. Both are doing a good job, but there's just the riffs are a little slightly more simplistic than on Under Reprisal, but that's not anything against them as musicians, because you'll see on the next album that, well, at least Travis is still there. he really steps up his game. So I think part of the reason for it is that the band was trying to do a more pulled back and simplistic direction with this album instead of doing this all crazy technical kind of stuff. But there's still a lot of technical moments throughout the album, and they're doing a great job on guitar. And the solos are cool. There's all these cool melodic bits throughout the whole thing. One thing about the solos, though, is that there aren't as many as their last album, and they aren't as technical, but they still do a good job for what they're trying to do with this album. And there are these moments where the solos come in that really change up the songs, and it's good solo work. It's not as good as Under Reprisal was, but it's still fantastic. And then one thing I do want to say about the guitar tuning, or the guitar tone, or whatever, the production on the guitars, it's less crunchy than Under Reprisal. It sounds a little more smooth, and it's sort of interesting. It's not anything bad. It's just a cool and different sound than their previous album. Pat Kavanagh on bass. I can hear the bass throughout the entire album. There are moments where he's doing different things on the guitars, but for the most part, he's just following along. But it's turned up loud, and he's following along with some really technical guitar playing, so he's doing a really good job playing his bass at that technical level as the rest of them. So he's doing a great job on bass. And Norman Killeen on drums, he's doing a great job. There's all these cool technical drum parts and fills and all this stuff that keeps the drumming interesting throughout, and it always fits well with what the guitars are doing when they're doing all these crazy technical types of riffs. He's doing all the cool polyrhythmic, genty type drumming that you expect from Threat Signal. It's about the same level as their previous album. There's not really anything different. It's still really good, and the drumming really stands out, as always, on Threat Signal releases, because they just have all these technical drum parts throughout the whole thing. And it comes together really nicely for a great sounding album. So, final thoughts on the album. I don't think it's as good an album as Under the Reprisal, but it is still a fantastic album, and it's definitely worth checking out. And it's a good entry point for new Threat Signal fans, because it's more pulled back and more metalcore, so it's more accessible to new listeners. But that doesn't mean it's a bad album. It's still a great album, and it's worth checking out, especially a few of the songs I mentioned, like Through My Eyes, which is just a fantastic song. And if you're only going to get one song from the album, it would be that one, because it's just a great song. So, I think overall, with all these new band members coming in, they still have great chemistry, and they pull off a really great album. And I look forward to seeing what they do on the next album after listening to this. And actually, when I first heard this album last year, I went and picked up their most recent album, because I was really looking forward to what they were going to do next from this album, because it's a great starting point for where they can go in the future, and getting a feel for the new band members. So overall, like I keep saying, it's a good album. It's not as good as Under Reprisal, but it's still good. So go check it out. That wraps up my review, and remember, be sure to like the video if you enjoy watching my rambling reviews, and subscribe if you want to see more of them. And I will see you guys next week with the last album in the Threat Signal discography. See ya.